Imagine waking up surrounded by nothing but sand and silence, the blistering sun beating down on your skin, your throat parched, and the metallic taste of blood in your mouth. Everyone you were traveling with is gone, dead, and the echo of gunshots still rings in your ears. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This was Elizabeth Thornton's reality on a scorching summer day in 1878, when what should have been a routine journey through Arizona territory turned into a desperate fight for survival. A wealthy Boston socialite traveling west to meet her fiancé, Elizabeth had no skills for wilderness survival, no knowledge of the harsh desert, and no reason to believe she would live to see another sunrise. But fate had other plans. When an Apache scout named Nakohe discovered her half dead among the rocks, neither could have imagined how their lives would become intertwined, or how together they would uncover a conspiracy that reached all the way to Washington, D.C. This is the remarkable true story of survival, unlikely friendship, and justice in the Wild West. This is the story of Elizabeth Thornton. Elizabeth Thornton stared out the window of the lurching stagecoach, wondering how a landscape so beautiful could simultaneously be so menacing. Having spent her entire 23 years in Boston's refined society, the Arizona territory struck her as an alien world. The red rocks jutting toward the sky like ancient cathedrals, the sparse vegetation clinging stubbornly to life, the vastness of it all made her feel insignificant. "First time in the West, Mom?" asked the elderly gentleman seated across from her. Samuel Parker was his name, a silver-haired banker returning to Tucson after a business trip to St. Louis. Elizabeth nodded, adjusting her expensive bonnet. "Is it that obvious, Mr. Parker?" he chuckled. "The way you're taking it all in, like you've never seen the world before." His weathered face crinkled with a friendly smile. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Tucson's civilized enough these days. Not like when I first arrived in '58. The other passengers, a young minister named Reverend James Miller, a traveling salesman called Harold Jenkins, and a quiet woman introduced as Mrs. Martha Wilson, all smiled knowingly. They'd been traveling together for 2 days now, forming the kind of temporary bond that comes from shared discomfort and close quarters. Elizabeth returned to gazing out the window. She wouldn't be staying in Tucson long anyway, just long enough to finalize arrangements before continuing to San Francisco, where Robert waited. Robert Pembroke, her fiancé of 3 years, had gone ahead 6 months earlier to establish their new home and his law practice. One last frontier to conquer before the territory fully embraced statehood and civilization. The letter in her reticule crinkled as she shifted in her seat. She had read it so many times the paper was becoming thin. "At the folds, my dearest Elizabeth, the house is nearly ready for your arrival. You will find San Francisco quite agreeable, I believe. The society here, while not Boston, has its charms. I have secured a position with Harrington and Sons that promises excellent prospects." The coach hit a particularly deep rut, jolting Elizabeth from her thoughts and causing Mrs. Wilson to grab the leather strap hanging beside the window. "Sorry, folks," called the driver from above. "Roads washed out something terrible after those rains last week." The Reverend Miller clutched his Bible tighter. "The Lord tests us with small discomforts to prepare us for greater challenges." Harold Jenkins, the salesman, rolled his eyes when the Reverend looked away. Elizabeth stifled a smile. "How much longer to the station, driver?" called Mr. Parker through the window. 2 hours, God willing," came the reply. 2 more hours." Elizabeth sighed. Her corset felt increasingly restrictive in the Arizona heat, and dust had settled into every fold of her traveling suit. She longed for a proper bath and a clean bed. Jenkins leaned forward. "I've made this trip 8 times now, and I'll tell you what, Morgan's Way Station sets out the finest stew west of the Mississippi. Makes the journey worthwhile." "I don't much care about the stew," Mrs. Wilson spoke, surprising everyone, since she'd barely said 10 words since boarding. "I just want to stretch my legs and sleep horizontal." The mood in the coach lightened with gentle laughter, but it was short-lived. A sharp crack echoed through the air, like a branch snapping, but louder. The coach lurched violently, then began to pick up speed. "What on earth?" Mr. Parker exclaimed, trying to look out the window. Another crack, unmistakably a gunshot this time, followed by shouting. The passengers were thrown against each other as the coach swerved sharply. "Good Lord! We're being robbed!" cried Jenkins. Elizabeth's heart hammered in her chest as more shots rang out. The Reverend Miller began praying loudly, his voice shaking with each bump and swerve of the coach. "Everyone down," Mr. Parker commanded, sliding to the floor of the coach. He pulled a small derringer from his coat pocket. "When I worked for the banks in Missouri, we had our share of road agents. Stay low." Elizabeth crouched on the floor, her expensive skirts bunching around her. Mrs. Wilson's face had gone pale as parchment, her knuckles white where she gripped the seat. The coach picked up speed, bouncing wildly over the rough terrain. They could hear the driver shouting and cracking his whip above them. More gunfire, closer now. The horses screamed. Suddenly, the world upended. The stagecoach hit something, a rock, a ditch Elizabeth would never know, and tipped onto its side. She felt herself airborne for a terrible moment before slamming against the side of the coach, now the floor. Someone fell on top of her. Jenkins, she thought, his weight crushing the air from her lungs. Pain exploded in her temple. Warm wetness trickled down her face. The world spun. Voices shouted. More gunshots cracked through the air. "Please, we're unarmed citizens," she heard Mr. Parker say, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Take what you want." Another shot. A woman's scream. Mrs. Wilson, then another shot. And another. Elizabeth tried to move, to see, but the weight on top of her was immobile. The coppery smell of blood filled her nostrils. Her vision dimmed. At the edges, boots crunched on broken glass and wood. A rough voice, "Check them all, make sure." "This one's still breathing," said another voice closer. Elizabeth closed her eyes, willing herself to remain perfectly still, despite the thundering of her heart. She felt a hand roughly grab her wrist, checking for a pulse. "This fancy lady's gone too," said the voice above her. "Shot through the head, looks like. The blood from her scalp wound had saved her life," she would later realize. "They thought she was already dead. That's all of them then. Get the strongbox and let's ride. Ain't got much time." More movement. The sound of breaking wood and metal, laughter, then hoofbeats fading into the distance. Elizabeth remained motionless, barely breathing, for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. When she finally dared to open her eyes, the weight of Jenkins' body still pressed down on her, his dead eyes staring at nothing. Slowly, painfully, she pushed him off and sat up. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of horror. The stagecoach lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily. The horses were gone, shot or stolen, and the bodies. Mr. Parker slumped against the cracked window, his derringer unfired. In his hand, the Reverend Miller lay half outside the door, his Bible soaked crimson. Mrs. Wilson's body was crumpled in the corner, her traveling dress torn and bloodied. Outside, the driver and shotgun guard were sprawled on the ground, riddled with bullets. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she touched the wound on her head. It wasn't deep, but head wounds always bled profusely. She would live, the only one who would. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone in the Arizona desert. No water, no protection from the elements, no idea which direction led to civilization. And the men who did this might return if they realized their mistake. She had to move. Now, using the frame of the overturned door, Elizabeth pulled herself up and out of the coach. Her fine boots, made for Boston cobblestones, slipped on the sand as she stood on trembling legs. The sun was descending toward the horizon. She had perhaps 3 hours of daylight left. Instinct told her to stay with the coach. Someone would come looking eventually, but when? The way station expected them by nightfall, but how long would they wait before sending a search party? A day, two, and what if the robbers returned first? No, staying wasn't an option. Elizabeth forced herself to approach the bodies outside the coach. The driver, a man called Wilkins, had a canteen strapped to his belt. She removed it, trying not to look at his vacant eyes, half full. Better than nothing. His pockets yielded a small knife, which she took. The guard had a pistol still holstered at his side. Elizabeth had never fired a gun in her life, but she took it anyway, along with the ammunition belt. Back inside the coach, she retrieved her reticule, still miraculously attached to her wrist by its strap, and Mr. Parker's pocket watch and compass. Mrs. Wilson's basket contained a small loaf of journey bread and an apple. These too Elizabeth took, whispering an apology to the dead woman. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. From Jenkins' sample case, she salvaged a length of fabric that could serve as a head covering against the sun. The Reverend's canteen was empty, but his coat might be useful against the desert night chill. As she gathered these meager supplies, Elizabeth tried to recall what little she knew about desert survival. Stay out of the sun, conserve water, follow. Dry riverbeds, they eventually lead to water, but in which direction should she go? The stagecoach had been heading southwest toward Tucson. They'd passed a small settlement. What was it called? Bitter Springs? About 4 hours back. Too far to return on foot. The way station was closer, but in which direction exactly? Elizabeth checked the compass. If they'd been traveling southwest, then northeast would take her back toward Bitter Springs. But the crash and her disorientation made it hard to be certain. The coach's tracks would be the most reliable guide, but they'd been traveling fast and erratically before the crash. She looked down at her traveling outfit. The fine blue wool suit with its fashionable bustle and tight sleeves. Entirely unsuitable for desert travel. With grim determination, she began to modify her clothing as best she could. She removed the bustle and outer layer of her skirt. Using Jenkins' scissors from his sample case, she cut the sleeves at the elbow for better movement. She tore strips from her petticoat to wrap around her hands and face for protection from the sun. As she worked, her mind raced. Who would target their stagecoach? There had been no strongbox that she knew of, at least none visible to the passengers. They'd taken Mr. Parker's wallet and Mrs. Wilson's wedding ring, but those were hardly worth the effort of such a violent robbery, unless they were after something specific. Someone specific. The thought sent a chill through her despite the heat. Her father, Judge William Thornton of the Massachusetts Superior Court, had enemies. His recent rulings against several railroad companies had made him unpopular in certain circles. But would they go so far as to arrange an ambush in Arizona territory? It seemed far-fetched. Yet something about the methodical execution of everyone aboard nagged at her. Common bandits might rob, might even kill if resisted, but to systematically execute everyone. That spoke of something else, something personal. Elizabeth forced the thoughts aside. Survival first, questions later. With her preparations complete, she took one last look at the coach. She should bury the dead, she knew. It was the proper Christian thing to do. But she had no shovel. The ground was hard, and darkness approached. The dead would have to forgive her this final discourtesy. "I'll send help," she whispered. "I promise." Compass in hand, makeshift head covering in place, Elizabeth Thornton began walking southwest, following what she believed to be their original course. The way station had to be ahead. It was her only hope. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as she walked. Within an hour, her throat was parched, her lips cracked. She allowed herself tiny sips from the canteen, barely enough to wet her mouth. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a sea of sand and rock dotted with cacti and scrub brush. As the sun began to set, painting the landscape in oranges and reds, Elizabeth felt the first real pangs of fear. She had perhaps covered 3 miles, a pitiful distance given the urgency of her situation. Her feet, unused to such exertion, developed blisters that burst and reformed with each step. The modified shoes, with their fashionable heels cut off using the knife, were still woefully inadequate. The cooling air brought some relief, but new concerns. Desert nights were cold, she knew. The Reverend's coat would help, but she would need shelter. As darkness fell, Elizabeth searched for a suitable location, somewhere elevated where snakes and other creatures would be less likely to find her. She settled on a small outcropping of rocks, not ideal, but better than the open ground. Using the knife, she cleared the area of obvious hazards before settling down for the night. She allowed herself a small piece of Mrs. Wilson's journey bread and another careful sip of water. As the stars emerged in brilliant clarity above her, Elizabeth wrapped the coat around her shoulders and leaned back against the rock. She thought of Robert waiting in San Francisco, probably already composing a letter to send to Tucson, unaware that she would never receive it. She thought of her parents in Boston, who might never learn her fate. A coyote howled in the distance, the sound echoing across the empty landscape. Elizabeth clutched the guard's pistol tighter, though she doubted her ability to use it effectively. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, her grandmother's favorite saying. "Just get through tonight. Tomorrow will bring new possibilities." But as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. From somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes tracked her movements, waiting for dawn. When morning came, it brought no relief. Elizabeth's head throbbed where she'd been struck, and her body ached from the crash and the hard ground. Her water was half gone already, and the journey bread had hardened overnight. She forced herself to her feet. The rising sun provided direction. East. She needed to continue southwest, but as she gathered her meager supplies, movement caught her eye. Something or someone darted between rocks about 100 yards away. Elizabeth froze, pistol raised with trembling hands. "Who's there?" she called, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. No answer came, but she felt certain now. She was not alone. Were the robbers back? Had they discovered their mistake and tracked her? Elizabeth made a quick decision. She couldn't outrun anyone in her condition. Better to confront whatever threat existed now, while she still had strength. "I'm armed," she called again. "Show yourself." For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind a large boulder. Not one of the robbers. Not a white man at all. An Apache warrior stood watching her, his face impassive, a rifle held casually at his side. Elizabeth's finger trembled on the trigger of the unfamiliar pistol as she stared at the Apache warrior. He stood perfectly still, studying her with dark, penetrating eyes. His black hair hung in 2 braids adorned with small beads, and a red bandana circled his forehead. The rifle in his hand remained pointed at the ground, not threatening, but certainly not forgotten. Time seemed suspended as they assessed one another across the expanse of desert. Elizabeth's parched throat constricted with fear, but she kept the pistol raised despite her shaking hands. Finally, the Apache spoke, his voice surprisingly clear in English. "That gun! You hold it wrong!" The unexpected comment momentarily bewildered Elizabeth. Of all the things he might have said, a critique of her weapon handling hadn't crossed her mind. I'll shoot if I have to," she managed, trying to sound confident. A hint of something, amusement perhaps, flickered across the warrior's face. "No, you won't." He gestured toward her hands. "Safety is on." Elizabeth glanced down briefly, then back at him. Unwilling to take her eyes off the potential threat for more than a second, she had no idea what a safety was or how to disengage it. The Apache took a single step forward, and Elizabeth immediately tensed. "Stay back!" He stopped, then slowly set his rifle on the ground. With deliberate movements, he raised his empty hands. "You are from the broken wagon. Many died there." It wasn't a question, but Elizabeth nodded anyway. Did you see who did it? White men, 6, on horses." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You are hurt, thirsty. You will die here without help." The bluntness of his statement struck Elizabeth like a physical blow. He was right, of course. She had perhaps another day of water. Her head wound needed proper attention, and she had no real sense of where she was going. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, the pistol still raised despite its apparent uselessness. The Apache regarded her for a long moment. "You shouldn't, but you will die if you don't." He slowly reached for something hanging at his side, a water skin, larger and fuller than her nearly depleted canteen. He tossed it gently toward her. It landed at her feet with a promising slosh. "Drink," he said. Elizabeth's thirst warred with her caution. Finally, necessity won out. She lowered the pistol and picked up the water skin, though she kept a wary eye on the Apache as she drank. The water was warm but clean, and it took all her willpower not to gulp it greedily. "Thank you," she said, after taking a measured sip. "Who are you?" "I am called Nakohe." He pressed a hand to his chest. "It means walks in mourning." "I'm Elizabeth Thornton." She hesitated, then added, "From Boston." Nakohe nodded as if this confirmed something for him. "You are far from your home, Boston woman." "I was traveling to Tucson, then on to San Francisco," Elizabeth explained, unsure why she was sharing this information, but feeling compelled to fill the awkward silence. "My fiancé is waiting for me there." "San Francisco." Nakohe looked to the west, very far, many mountains between here and there. He studied her again, with that penetrating gaze. "The men who attacked your wagon, you saw them?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Not clearly. It happened so fast. They thought I was dead." Her voice faltered as the memory of those terrible moments flooded back. Nakohe approached slowly, and this time Elizabeth didn't raise the pistol. He stopped a respectful distance away and pointed to her head wound. "This needs medicine. I have some at my camp." Elizabeth hesitated. Going with a stranger, an Apache at that, into the desert seemed foolhardy, but her alternatives were bleaker still. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Nakohe's expression remained impassive. "I scout for Blue Coats, your army, at Fort Bowie. I tracked the men who attacked your wagon. They raided an Apache camp 2 days ago, killed 3 of my people." His voice hardened. "We hunt the same men." This revelation shifted Elizabeth's perspective. Not a random encounter, but perhaps providence. "These men, they're outlaws then, attacking both whites and Apaches?" "They are dogs without honor," Nakohe said simply. "You saw their work. They kill all in their path." A cold realization settled over Elizabeth. If she'd stayed with the stagecoach, and if these men had returned to check their handiwork. "Your camp," she said. "Is it far?" "Half days. Walk, there is shelter, food." He glanced at the rising sun. "The heat comes soon. We should not be in the open." Elizabeth made her decision. "I'll go with you, but I'm keeping this." She tucked the pistol into the makeshift belt she'd fashioned from her petticoat. Nakohe's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "As you wish, but I will show you how to remove the safety first." The journey to Nakohe's camp tested Elizabeth's endurance to its limits. What the Apache had described as a half-day's walk might have been accurate for him, but for Elizabeth, with her city-bred constitution and improvised footwear, it was an ordeal that stretched her will to the breaking point. They walked in, silence for the most part, Nakohe setting a pace that was deliberately slow for her benefit, yet still challenging. When they stopped briefly in the shadow of a large rock formation to rest, Elizabeth removed what remained of her shoes. Her feet were a mass of blisters, some broken and bleeding. Nakohe knelt and examined them without comment. From a small pouch at his waist, he extracted a greenish paste that smelled of herbs and earth. Without asking permission, he began applying it to her wounds. "What is that?" Elizabeth asked, trying not to flinch at his touch. "Medicine, from agave and creosote bush." He worked methodically. "It will help with pain and stop sickness from coming into the wounds." The paste cooled the burning sensation almost immediately. When he finished, Nakohe tore strips from his own shirt and wrapped her feet carefully. "Thank you," Elizabeth said, genuinely moved by the unexpected kindness. Nakohe merely nodded and handed her the water skin again. "Drink! We will continue soon." As they resumed their journey, Elizabeth studied her unlikely companion when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with a natural grace that spoke of a lifetime in this harsh environment. Each step was placed with purpose, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She realized he was not just walking. He was reading the desert like a book, written in a language she couldn't begin to comprehend. "You said you work for the army," she ventured after another hour of walking. "As a scout?" "Yes. 3 winters now." His tone suggested there was more to the story. "Why?" Elizabeth pressed, partly out of curiosity and partly to distract herself from her discomfort. Nakohe was silent for so long that Elizabeth thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke. "My wife and daughter were killed by sickness that came from the white trading post. Measles." The word sounded clinical and out of place coming from him. "After they died, there was nothing for me with my band. The reservation or scouting, these were the choices." "I'm sorry about your family," Elizabeth said softly. "It was long ago." Nakohe's voice betrayed no emotion, but Elizabeth sensed the wound was far from healed. "The blue coats know I am good at tracking. I know this land better than they ever will, so I track them, and they give me freedom to come and go." They created a rise, and Elizabeth could see a small canyon ahead, its walls providing natural shelter from sun and wind. As they descended into it, she noticed signs of habitation, a carefully constructed shelter against one wall, a small fire pit, containers of what appeared to be water and supplies. "This is your camp?" she asked, surprised by its solitary nature. "Yes. I'll stay here while I'm tracking." Nakohe gestured toward the shelter. "You will rest there. I will tend your head wound, then find food." The shelter was simple but effective, a framework of branches covered with animal hides and canvas, creating a space large enough for 2 people to sit comfortably or 1 to lie down. Inside, furs and blankets formed a surprisingly comfortable bedding area. Elizabeth sank down gratefully, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that safety seemed at hand. Nakohe brought water in a clay bowl and clean clothes. With gentle efficiency, he cleaned her head wound, applied more of his herbal medicine, and bound it with a strip of clean cloth. "It is not deep," he pronounced, "but head wounds can bring fever if not cleaned." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, finding herself repeating these words frequently. "For everything." Nakohe acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. "Rest now. I will return with food." Left alone, Elizabeth took stock of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had been a proper Boston lady traveling west to join her fiancé. Now she was alone in the desert with an Apache scout, dependent on his goodwill for her very survival. What would her parents think? What would Robert think? Robert. She needed to get word to him somehow. He would be expecting her in San Francisco within the week. When she didn't arrive, what would he do? Would anyone connect her disappearance to the Stagecoach Robbery? And what of the robbers themselves? Nakohe had said there were 6 of them. They had killed everyone aboard the stagecoach, or so they thought, and had apparently raided an Apache camp days earlier. Not ordinary bandits then, but something worse. Men who killed without hesitation or remorse. These thoughts swirled in Elizabeth's mind as fatigue dragged her towards sleep. Despite her best efforts to remain alert, her eyes closed, and she drifted into uneasy slumber. The smell of cooking meat woke her. For a disoriented moment, Elizabeth thought she was back in Boston and her mother's cook was preparing dinner. Then reality rushed back as she opened her eyes to the hide shelter and the desert beyond. Nakohe crouched by a small fire, carefully tending what appeared to be rabbit meat on a makeshift spit. The sky visible through the canyon opening had deepened to the rich blue of late afternoon. "How long did I sleep?" Elizabeth asked, her voice hoarse. 3 hours. Nakohe didn't look up from his cooking. "Your body needs rest to heal." Elizabeth crawled from the shelter, wincing as she put weight on her injured feet. The herbal wrappings had stiffened somewhat, but still provided welcome cushioning. "The food will be ready soon," Nakohe said. "There is water in the jug if you wish to clean yourself." Elizabeth gratefully accepted the opportunity to wash her face and hands. The cool water revived her spirit somewhat, though she longed for a proper bath and clean clothes. When the meat was done, Nakohe handed her a generous portion on a flat piece of wood that served as a plate. Elizabeth, raised with the strictest table manners, now found herself eating with her fingers, tearing at the meat with a hunger that surprised her. "This is good," she said between bites. "Thank you. Rabbit is good meat, easy to find." Nakohe ate with methodical efficiency. "Tomorrow we must decide what to do with you." The blunt statement caught Elizabeth off guard. "What do you mean? You cannot stay here. I must continue tracking the raiders." He looked directly at her. "The army post at Fort Bowie is a 2 days journey. Tucson has 3, perhaps longer. In your condition," Elizabeth considered her options. "Tucson is where I was headed. My fiancé's colleague is there. He would help me get word of San Francisco. The men who attacked your wagon may be watching the roads to Tucson," Nakohe pointed out. "If they learn you survived." The implication hung in the air between them. If the robbers discovered she had survived, they would surely try to finish what they'd started. "You mentioned Fort Bowie," Elizabeth said. "You said you work for the army there. Wouldn't that be safer?" Nakohe nodded slowly. "Perhaps. The blue coats could escort you to Tucson with soldiers." "Then that's where I should go." Elizabeth set aside her empty plate. "But you said it's a 2 days journey. My feet—" "I will make better coverings for your feet tomorrow," Nakohe promised, "and we will go slowly." A new thought occurred to Elizabeth. "These men you're tracking, the ones who attacked the stagecoach. Why do you think they did it? They killed everyone, even after they had surrendered." Nakohe's expression darkened. "They search for something, or someone." "What do you mean?" "At the Apache camp they raided. They searched all the lodges and took a few things of value. One asked many questions about a white man who had visited our people months ago." Nakohe's eyes narrowed. "A man with papers." Elizabeth's mind raced. "What kind of papers?" "Maps, perhaps, documents with writing." "The raiders were very interested in finding these." Nakohe studied her reaction carefully. "Your wagon. Was anyone carrying special papers?" Elizabeth thought back to the passengers. Mr. Parker, the banker, had carried a leather portfolio, but she hadn't seen what was in it. The Reverend had his Bible. Mrs. Wilson and the salesman Jenkins had seemed to carry nothing unusual. "I don't know," she admitted, "but they were very thorough in killing everyone. That seems excessive for a simple robbery." "Yes." Nakohe stared into the fire. "Men who kill like that have purpose." They lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts as darkness settled over the canyon. Eventually, Nakohe banked the fire to provide warmth without a visible flame that might attract attention. "You should sleep," he told Elizabeth. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "What about you?" she asked, noticing he made no move toward the shelter. "I will watch." He settled himself against the canyon wall, rifle across his lap. "Sleep is not always necessary." Elizabeth returned to the shelter, her mind still turning over the mystery of the stagecoach attack. As she drifted towards sleep again, a new, troubling thought surfaced. What if the papers the raiders sought were not with any of the passengers, but in her own luggage? What if they had killed everyone looking for something they believed she possessed? The thought should have kept her awake, but exhaustion claimed her before she could pursue it further. Her last conscious awareness was of Nakohe's silhouette, against the night sky, a vigilant guardian between her and the dangers that lurked in the desert darkness. Dawn arrived with a riot of colors painting the canyon walls. Elizabeth woke to find Nakohe already active, preparing what appeared to be a simple breakfast of dried meat and some kind of flatbread. "We leave soon," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Eat quickly, we have far to go." Elizabeth accepted the food gratefully. As she ate, Nakohe presented her with something that made her eyes widen in surprise. A pair of moccasins. "You made these?" "When?" she asked, taking the soft leather footwear while you slept. "Your feet will heal better in these than in your broken shoes." He gestured for her to try them on. "They are made for walking long distances." The moccasins fit surprisingly well, cushioning her battered feet. Elizabeth stood experimentally, finding the discomfort significantly reduced. "These are wonderful," she said with genuine appreciation. "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." Nakohe shrugged off her gratitude. "We both want the same thing, to find the men who attacked your wagon and my people." He began efficiently packing his few belongings. "At Fort Bowie you will be safe, and I will continue hunting." As Elizabeth helped gather their meager supplies, a flash of metal caught her eye from Nakohe's pack, a silver pocket watch, distinctive with an engraved cover that she recognized immediately. "Where did you get that?" she asked sharply. Nakohe followed her gaze. "From one of the raiders' camp. They had many things taken from your wagon. That belonged to Mr. Parker, one of the passengers." Elizabeth reached for it, then hesitated. "May I?" Nakohe handed it to her without objection. Elizabeth opened the case to confirm her suspicion. Inside the cover was an inscription. "To Samuel, with love eternal. Margaret, June 12th, 1853. "You found their camp?" she asked, handing the watch back. "How close is it?" "Half-day's ride on horseback. Northeast." Nakohe tucked the watch away. "They left yesterday morning, moving south." "Toward Mexico?" "Perhaps." Nakohe finished his preparations and stood. "The border is a good place for men like these to disappear." A new urgency filled Elizabeth. "We need to tell the army before they escape completely. That is why we go to Fort Bowie," Nakohe reminded her. "But first, we must get you there alive." With that sobering thought, they began their journey. Elizabeth, now better equipped with the moccasins and having benefited from rest and food, found the going somewhat easier than the previous day. Still, the desert landscape remained unforgiving, and the sun's heat intensified as the morning progressed. Nakohe set a sustainable pace, occasionally stopping in patches of shade to rest and drink. During one such break, he suddenly raised his hand in a signal for silence. His entire demeanor changed, body tensing as he listened to something Elizabeth couldn't hear. "What is it?" she whispered after several tense moments. "Horses, coming this way." Nakohe gestured urgently toward a cluster of rocks. "Hide, now!" Elizabeth didn't question the command. She scrambled behind the rocks, pressing herself into a narrow crevice as Nakohe melted into the landscape with a skill born of a lifetime in the wilderness. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. From her hiding place, Elizabeth saw them appear over a rise. 3 riders, trail-worn and armed. Even from a distance, she could see they were hard men, the kind whose faces told stories of violence and lawlessness. "Are you sure this is the way?" one called to another. "Course I'm sure. Stagecoach route runs just south of here. Fort's to the west." "Waste of time," grumbled the third. "She's dead like the rest or died in the desert by now." Elizabeth's blood froze. They were looking for her. Somehow they'd discovered their mistake. "Boss wants to be certain," replied the first rider. "Said this judge's daughter could cause us all kinds of trouble if she made it to civilization." Judge's daughter. They knew who she was. This hadn't been a random attack. They'd targeted the stagecoach because she was on it. But why? The riders drew closer to their hiding place. Elizabeth pressed further back into the crevice, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain they would hear it. She closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer. The hoofbeats stopped. Elizabeth held her breath as the riders halted mere yards from her hiding place. Through a narrow gap in the rocks, she could see them more clearly now, dust-covered men with hard eyes and weather-beaten faces. Gun belts hung low on their hips, and rifles rested in saddle scabbards within easy reach. "Let's water the horses here," said the first man, a tall figure with a prominent scar crossing his left cheek. "Then split up. Reynolds, you circle north. Doyle, take the south route. I'll continue along the stage road." "What about the Apache? Tracks we saw back yonder?" asked the one called Doyle, a squat man with a rust-colored beard. "You think he found her?" "If he did, all the more reason to find them both," replied Scarface. "Boss was clear, no witnesses, especially not some Apache scout who might get the army involved." Elizabeth's mind raced. They knew about Nakohe. Had they been tracking them all along? The men dismounted, leading their horses to a small sip of water that Elizabeth hadn't even noticed in the rocks nearby. She pressed deeper into her crevice, painfully aware that if any of them decided to explore the rock formation, she would be discovered instantly. Where was Nakohe? She scanned what little of the surroundings she could see, but detected no sign of him. Had he abandoned her? No, that made no sense after all he'd done to help her. The third man, presumably Reynolds, walked toward the rocks, unbuttoning his trousers. Elizabeth realized with horror that he intended to relieve himself right next to her hiding place. She closed her eyes, her hand instinctively moving to the pistol tucked in her makeshift belt. The pistol Nakohe had shown her how to use, removing the safety mechanism and explaining the basics of aiming. Reynolds was less than 5 feet away now. In moments, he would see her. A sharp whistle cut through the air from the opposite direction, a bird call that sounded perfectly natural yet somehow wrong for this place and time. The men instantly tensed, hands moving to their weapons. "What was that?" demanded Doyle. "Probably nothing," said Scarface, though his tone betrayed his uncertainty. "Reynolds, check it out." Reynolds hastily unbuttoned his trousers and drew his revolver, moving cautiously toward the source of the sound. The moment he disappeared from Elizabeth's limited view, a commotion erupted, the sounds of struggle, a choked cry, then silence. "Reynolds?" called Scarface, his own gun now drawn. "Reynolds, report!" "Nothing." Scarface motioned to Doyle. "Circle around that way. I'll take this side. And for God's sake, keep your eyes open." The two men moved off in opposite directions, leaving the horses unattended by the sheep. For several long moments, Elizabeth remained frozen in her hiding place, listening to the receding footsteps and the pounding of her own heart. Then, like a shadow, Nakohe appeared beside her. His sudden presence nearly caused her to cry out, but he quickly pressed a finger to his lips. "We must go now," he whispered. "Quickly! What happened to— No time, follow me." With nimble movements, Nakohe led her from the rocks toward the unattended horses. Elizabeth realized his plan immediately. They would take the raiders' own mounts. But as they approached, a shout rang out from behind them. "There they are!" A gunshot cracked through the air, kicking up dust at their feet. Nkoe pushed Elizabeth roughly toward the nearest horse. "Mount!" he commanded, already swinging himself onto another. "Now!" Elizabeth had ridden in Boston's parks on placid, well-trained mares with proper ladies' saddles. This was an entirely different proposition. a trail-hardened gelding with a western saddle, already skittish from the gunfire, but desperation lent her strength and coordination she didn't know she possessed. Grabbing the saddle horn, she pulled herself up, gripping the reins tightly as the horse danced sideways. Nakohe was already moving, rifle in hand. He fired twice toward their pursuers, not aiming to hit, but to force them to take cover. Elizabeth dug her heels into her mount's flanks, and the horse leapt forward, nearly unseating her. She clutched the saddle horn desperately as they galloped away from the chaos, Nakohe leading the third horse alongside him. More gunshots rang out behind them, but distance was quickly rendering them ineffective. Elizabeth risked a glance back to see Scarface and Doyle growing smaller in the distance, shaking their fists in impotent rage. Where are we going?" she gasped as they maintained their headlong pace over the rough terrain. "Fort Bowie, but not by the direct route," Nakohe called back. "They will expect that. We go north first, then circle west." Elizabeth opened the second seal, reading quickly by starlight. Her face paled. Robert was supposed to deliver these documents to the federal prosecutor in San Francisco. My father discovered a conspiracy that reaches into the government itself. He couldn't trust official channels in Boston. She looked up, horrified. "He sent me as an unwitting courier. He never told me because he wanted my reaction to be genuine if I was questioned." "Your father used you as bait," Nakohe observed, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "No, he wouldn't. He must have thought I would be safer not knowing." Even as she said it, Elizabeth felt hollow. Her own father had placed her in mortal danger without her knowledge or consent. He arranged additional security for me, men who were supposed to board the stagecoach in Santa Fe. I never met them. They must have been delayed or killed before they could reach you, Nakohe finished grimly. Elizabeth rubbed her temples, trying to process this revelation. "What do we do now? If we make it to Fort Bowie, how do I know who to trust? If this conspiracy reaches into the government—" "You trust no one," Nakohe said simply. "Except me." Despite everything, Elizabeth found herself smiling faintly. "Why should I trust you?" The question wasn't accusatory. She did trust him, implicitly, after all they'd been through. But she wanted to understand his motivation. Nakohe considered her question seriously. "Because I have no love for the men who built railroads through Apache land, because they killed my people at that camp, and because I gave you my word." It was enough. Elizabeth carefully replaced the documents in the envelope. "We need to get these to San Francisco, to the federal prosecutor, as my father intended. First, Fort Bowie," Nakohe reminded her, "for safety. Then we decide the next steps." Elizabeth nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. Would they truly be safe anywhere, with such powerful enemies hunting them? She returned the envelope to her reticule, then lay back on her bedroll. "Try to sleep now," Nakohe said. "I will wake you if there is trouble." This time, exhaustion overcame her racing thoughts, and Elizabeth drifted into uneasy slumber. She woke to Nakohe's hand over her mouth, his eyes alert in the pre-dawn gloom. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed to the rim of the arroyo. Above them, Elizabeth strained to hear what had alerted him, then caught it, the faint sound of hoofbeats, still distant but approaching. "How did they find us?" she whispered when he removed his hand. "They are good trackers too," Nakohe replied softly. "Or they guessed our direction." He was already gathering their meager belongings, moving with quiet efficiency. "We must ride, now, within minutes." They had saddled the horses and mounted Nakohe, still leading the third horse as a spare. They moved silently up a game trail that led out of the arroyo, away from the approaching riders. As they created the rise, Elizabeth glanced back, her breath catching as she spotted at least 5 mounted figures in the distance, silhouetted against the lightening eastern sky. "More than before," she whispered. Nakohe nodded grimly. They called. "Her friends. Now we ride hard. They set off at a gallop across the open terrain, making no attempt at concealment. Speed was their only advantage now. Elizabeth clung to her saddle as her horse followed Nakohe's lead, trying to ignore the burning in her muscles and the knowledge that armed men pursued them with deadly intent. The sun rose fully as they rode, revealing a changing landscape. The desert scrub gradually gave way to more substantial vegetation, juniper and pinon pines dotting the hillsides. They were climbing in elevation, Elizabeth realized, as the air took on a slightly cooler quality, despite the mounting heat of the day. "How much farther?" she called Nakohe as they paused briefly to rest the horses at a small spring. "We reach the fort by midday, if we maintain this pace." He glanced back the way they had come, eyes narrowing. "They still follow, but we have gained distance." As they prepared to mount again, Nakohe suddenly stiffened, his gaze fixed on something to the west. Elizabeth followed his line of sight, but saw nothing unusual among the scattered trees and rock formations. "What is it?" she asked. "Dust." Nakohe pointed to what appeared to be a faint haze on the horizon. "Riders coming from the direction of the fort." Elizabeth's heart leapt. "Soldiers coming to help us." Perhaps. Nakohe didn't sound convinced. "Or more of the raiders cutting off our route. What do we do?" Nakohe considered their options, eyes moving between the dust on the western horizon and the barely visible pursuers to the east. "We change direction, head north into the mountains, more places to hide there." "But the fort?" Elizabeth nodded, focusing all her energy on staying mounted as they raced across the desert. The stolen horses were better trained than she'd feared, responding well to Nakohe's commands as he led them into increasingly rocky terrain where their tracks would be harder to follow. After nearly an hour of hard riding, Nakohe finally signaled to slow their pace. The horses were lathered with sweat, their sides heaving. Elizabeth's muscles screamed from the unaccustomed exertion, but a fierce sense of triumph burned in her chest. They had escaped. "What happened back there?" she asked as they let the horses walk to cool down. "The man who went to investigate, he will wake with a headache," Nakohe replied, his expression unreadable. "I did not kill him. It would have taken too long." The matter-of-fact response sent a chill through Elizabeth, despite the desert heat. Nakohe was not a cruel man, she had come to realize, but he was pragmatic about survival in ways her sheltered Boston upbringing had never prepared her for. "They knew who I was," Elizabeth said, the realization still shocking. "They called me the judge's daughter. This wasn't a random robbery. They were looking for me specifically." Nakohe nodded grimly. "I heard. Your father, he is an important man?" Judge William Thornton of the Massachusetts Superior Court. Elizabeth frowned, trying to make sense of it all. "He's respected, even feared in some circles. He's ruled against powerful interests, railroads, mining companies, banking consortiums. But to send assassins all the way to Arizona territory, it seems excessive." "Men of power often have long reach," Nakohe observed, "and more enemies than they know. They mentioned papers, too, like you said they were searching for at the Apache camp." Elizabeth's brow furrowed in concentration. "What could be so important?" "We will ask at Fort Bowie," Nakohe said. "They have telegraphs. Can send a message to your father." The thought of contacting her family brought a surge of emotion that Elizabeth hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. Her parents must be told she was alive. And Robert, what must he be thinking as the days passed with no word from her? "How far is the fort now?" she asked. "With horses we can reach it by nightfall tomorrow, if we are not followed." Nakohe scanned the horizon behind them. "For now we should keep moving, not as fast but steady." They continued their journey through the afternoon, Nakohe setting a sustainable pace that would preserve the horse's strength while covering ground. He seemed to navigate by an internal compass, rarely hesitating at junctions or rises. Occasionally, he would stop to study the ground or distant landmarks, adjusting their course slightly, As evening approached, they descended into a narrow arroyo that offered natural concealment. Nakohe dismounted, helping Elizabeth down from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled when they touched the ground, unused to so many hours in the saddle. "We camp here tonight," he announced. "No fire." "No fire?" Elizabeth glanced at the darkening sky. "But what about— Those men have friends," Nakohe interrupted. "Fire can be seen for miles at night. We stay cold. Stay alive." Elizabeth nodded, accepting his expertise. They unsaddled the horses and used the bedrolls attached to the saddles to make rudimentary camp. One small mercy of stealing the raiders. Mounts was acquiring their supplies as well, including jerky, hardtack, and canteens freshly filled that morning. As they ate their cold dinner, Elizabeth studied Nakohe in the fading light. "You said you scout for the army. Will they listen to you when we reach Fort Bowie? About the men who attacked us?" Nakohe's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Some will, others," he shrugged. "Not all bluecoats value Apache words." "But they'll believe me," Elizabeth said with determination. "A judge's daughter from Boston. They'll have to take my account seriously." "Perhaps." Nakohe didn't sound convinced. "Sleep now. I will take my first watch." Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive for Elizabeth. She lay on her bedroll, staring up at the star-filled sky, her mind replaying the events of the past 2 days. How quickly her world had changed, from pampered socialite to hunted fugitive in the span of 48 hours. And Nakohe. What strange twist of fate had placed her life in the hands of this stoic Apache scout? By all rights, given the history between their peoples, he should have left her to die in the desert. Instead, he had saved her, protected her, risked his own life for her. Why? "You should be sleeping." Nakohe's quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. He sat a few yards away, a dark silhouette against the night sky. "I can't stop thinking," Elizabeth admitted. "About everything that's happened, about why those men want me dead." Nakohe was silent for a long moment. "Sometimes it is not about you, but what you represent, or what they think you know." "But I don't know anything," Elizabeth protested. "I'm just a judge's daughter traveling to meet my fiancé. Perhaps it is not what you know, but what you carry." Nakohe's voice was thoughtful. "You said your father ruled against powerful men. Could he have sent something with you, something hidden?" Elizabeth sat up, struck by the possibility. "I have trunks of belongings being shipped separately by rail. But with me, I only had a single value: clothing, personal items." She trailed off, remembering something. "My father gave me a letter for Robert, sealed, said it was legal matters regarding our marriage settlement." "This letter, where is it?" "In my reticule." Elizabeth reached for the small bag she'd managed to keep with her through everything. Opening it, she extracted a thick envelope, sealed with wax bearing her father's signet. "I never thought to open it. It wasn't addressed to me." Nakohe came closer, examining the envelope without touching it. "This seal, it would show if it had been opened?" "Yes, and it's intact." Elizabeth turned the envelope over in her hands. "Do you think this is what they're looking for?" "We should open it." Elizabeth hesitated. "It's private correspondence. My father would— Your father would want you alive." Nakohe cut in bluntly. "If this letter is why men hunt you, you should know why." He was right, of course. With trembling fingers, Elizabeth broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was not a single letter but several documents, legal papers from the look of them, and a separate sealed letter addressed to Robert. Elizabeth spread the documents on her bedroll, squinting to read them in the dim starlight. They appeared to be legal affidavits signed and notarized, along with what looked like ledger entries. "I don't understand all of this," she said after scanning several pages. It's financial information about the Western Pacific Railroad Corporation, records of bribes, falsified land claims. She looked up at Nakohe. My father was presiding over a case against them before I left Boston. These documents would prove fraud on an enormous scale. Your father sent evidence with you, Nakohe said, understanding Dawn, away from Boston, where his enemies could not find it. But they did find it, or at least they found me. Elizabeth gathered the papers with shaking hands. These could destroy some of the wealthiest men in America. No wonder they were willing to kill for them. The letter to your fiancé, Nakohe prompted, is too dangerous if those are not soldiers. Nakohe was already turning his horse. Come, there is an Apache camp in the mountains. My people. They will shelter us while we decide what to do next. Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before following him. Thus far, Nakohe's instincts had kept them alive. If he believed the approaching riders represented danger rather than salvation, she would trust his judgment. They rode north, pushing their already tired horses up increasingly steep terrain. The vegetation thickened around them, providing welcome, concealment, but making progress more difficult. Several times Nakohe backtracked or chose peculiar routes, laying false trails, Elizabeth realized, to confuse their pursuers. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back on the desert. Floor spread out below them. In the distance, two groups of riders had converged at the spring where they had rested earlier. Even from this distance, Elizabeth could tell they were not soldiers. Their clothing was too varied, their movements lacking military precision. You were right, she acknowledged. Not soldiers. The raiders have many friends, Nakohe observed, and now they know we head north. Will we reach your people's camp by nightfall? Nakohe shook his head. Tomorrow, perhaps. Tonight we find a defensible place to rest. The horses cannot continue much longer. As if to emphasize his point, Elizabeth's mount stumbled slightly on the rocky trail. The poor animals had been pushed, hard for 2 days with minimal rest. I'm sorry, she murmured, patting her horse's sweat-dampened neck. Just a little farther. They continued their ascent into the mountains, the air growing noticeably cooler as they climbed. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau that offered both concealment and a commanding view of the approaches. A trickle of water seeped from a rock face, creating a tiny pool before disappearing again into the earth. We stop here, Nakohe announced, dismounting. Good place to defend if they come. Elizabeth nearly fell as she dismounted, her legs refusing to support her after so many hours in the saddle. Nakohe caught her arm, steadying her. Thank you, she said, embarrassed by her weakness. I'm not used to riding like this. You have done well, Nakohe said, with what might have been a hint of approval in his voice. Many white women would have failed long ago. Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. Elizabeth managed a tired smile as she helped him tend to the horses, removing their saddles and rubbing them down with handfuls of grass, as he had shown her. As they made camp, Nakohe allowed a small, smokeless fire this time. They were high, enough that the tiny flame wouldn't be visible from below, and the night chill at this elevation would be significant. Elizabeth gratefully warmed herself beside it as Nakohe prepared a meager meal from their dwindling supplies. Tomorrow we will reach your people, she asked, accepting a portion of jerky and hardtack. Nakohe nodded. If all goes well, my mother's sister's family camps in these mountains this season. They will help us. And then what? Elizabeth stared into the small flame. These men won't stop hunting us. Not with what's at stake. She patted her reticule where the documents rested. We still need to get these to San Francisco somehow. First safety, Nakohe said pragmatically. Then we plan. Apache camp will give us time to think. Raiders will not attack a whole camp. Elizabeth wasn't so sure, given the ruthlessness they'd already demonstrated, but she nodded anyway. One step at a time. Survive today, plan for tomorrow. As darkness fell completely, Nakohe extinguished their small fire. "You sleep," he told her. "I will watch first." "Wake me for a second watch," Elizabeth insisted. "You need rest too." Nakohe looked as if he might argue, then simply nodded. Elizabeth wrapped herself in a blanket from the raiders' supplies and lay down, her body aching in places she hadn't known could ache. Despite the discomfort, sleep came quickly. She dreamed of Boston, of her father's stern face as he handed her the sealed envelope, of Robert waiting in San Francisco, unaware of the danger she faced. In the dream, the raiders' faces shifted and changed, sometimes appearing as respected businessmen in fine suits, sometimes as snarling wolves with human eyes. She woke up with a start to Nakohe's hand on her shoulder. For a moment, disoriented by the dream, she nearly cried out. Then reality reasserted itself. The starlit plateau, the soft breathing of the horses, Nakohe's face in the darkness. "Your watch," he said quietly, handing her the rifle. 2 hours until dawn. Listen for horses on the trail below. Elizabeth nodded, taking the weapon and moving to the position Nakohe had occupied at the edge of the plateau. From here, she could see the faint outline of the trail they had ascended, winding through the darkness below. She settled in, rifle across her lap, determined to remain alert despite her fatigue. Nakohe lay down nearby, but Elizabeth sensed he wasn't fully asleep, just resting while remaining aware of their surroundings in a way she couldn't hope to match. The night was quiet except for the occasional call of a nightbird or the distant howl of a coyote. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, and Elizabeth found herself thinking of how differently she viewed the world now compared to just 3 days ago. How fragile the veneer of civilization, how quickly priorities changed when survival was at stake. As the first hint of gray touched the eastern horizon, Elizabeth noticed movement on the trail below, a shadow moving against shadows. She tensed, raising the rifle as Nakohe had shown her. "Nakohe," she whispered urgently, "someone's coming." Nakohe was beside her instantly, fully alert, taking the rifle from her hands in one fluid motion. He studied the movement below for several tense seconds, then unexpectedly relaxed. "Not raiders," he said, lowering the weapon. "Apache scout, one of my people." Relief washed over Elizabeth, but was quickly replaced by caution. "Are you sure? How can you tell?" "The way he moves, the pattern of his approach." Nakohe stood, making a series of hand gestures toward the figure below. After a moment, the shadowy form responded with similar motions. "He is Tlaka, Hawkeye, from my band," Nakohe explained. "A friend, he brings news." They waited as the lone Apache ascended the trail to their plateau. As he drew closer, Elizabeth could make out a lean man, perhaps a few years younger than Nakohe, his hair worn in the same traditional style, but with different beaded decorations. The two Apaches clasped forearms in greeting, speaking rapidly in their native language. Elizabeth caught the tension in both men's postures, the gravity in their expressions. Whatever news Tlaka brought, it wasn't good. "What is it?" she asked when they finally paused. "What's happened?" Nakohe turned to her, his face more somber than she had yet seen it. "The raiders attacked the camp I spoke of. My aunt's family. Last night." Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth. "No. Many escaped into the mountains," Nakohe continued. "But 3 were killed, including my aunt." "I'm so sorry," Elizabeth said, feeling the inadequacy of the words even as she spoke them. "This is because of me, because they're hunting us." "No," Nakohe said firmly, "this is because of men without honor who kill for money and power. Do not take their guilt upon yourself." Tlaka spoke again in Apache, gesturing toward the east. "The survivors have established a new camp deeper in the mountains," Nakohe translated. "Tlaka was sent to find us, warn us about the raiders. He says they have more men now, at least 15. 15? Elizabeth echoed, dismayed. "How can we possibly evade so many?" By being smarter, Nakohe replied, and by having friends. He turned back to Tlaka, conversing rapidly again before the younger Apache nodded and descended the trail, disappearing into the growing dawn light. "Where is he going?" Elizabeth asked. "To tell the others we are coming, and to arrange watchers on the trail behind us." Nakohe began gathering their few belongings. "We leave now. The new camp is half a day's ride if we push hard." They mounted. Up quickly, their brief rest doing little to alleviate the fatigue of horse or rider. As they followed a game trail higher into the mountains, Elizabeth forced back the guilt that threatened to overwhelm her. These people, Nakohe's people, were suffering and dying because she carried documents that threatened powerful men. "Your aunt," she ventured after they had ridden in silence for some time. "Was she my mother's youngest sister?" Nakohe supplied. "A healer. She taught me much about plants that cure and plants that harm. A wise woman." His voice remained level, but Elizabeth caught the slight tightening of his jaw. "She will be honored when we reach the camp." "And the others who were killed?" "A young warrior and an elder." Nakohe's expression darkened. "The raiders will pay a blood price for this." They continued climbing through increasingly rugged terrain. The horses struggled on the steeper sections, forcing them to dismount and lead, the animals along particularly treacherous stretches. By midday, they had crossed into a different ecosystem entirely, pine forests and small meadows replacing the scrubby vegetation of lower elevations. The air was cooler here, the silence deeper. Occasionally they passed signs that others had. Traveled this way recently, broken branches, disturbed soil, but Elizabeth would have missed these subtle indicators without Nakohe pointing them out. "Your people came this way," she observed. "Fleeing the raiders." Nakohe nodded. "With children and elders, in darkness, that they left so little sign of their passing speaks to their skill." Elizabeth thought of her own clumsy progress through this wilderness and felt a new respect for the Apache. To move a whole camp, including the very young and very old, through such terrain at night without leaving obvious tracks, it was an impressive feat. As afternoon waned, Nakohe's demeanor changed subtly. He scanned their surroundings more frequently, occasionally making those same hand gestures he had used with Tlaka. Twice, Elizabeth thought she glimpsed movement among the trees, but when she looked directly, there was nothing to see. "We are being watched," Nakohe confirmed when she mentioned it. "My people's sentries, making sure we are not followed or forced to lead enemies to the new camp." The knowledge that hidden eyes tracked their progress should have been unsettling, but Elizabeth found it oddly comforting. They were no longer alone against the raiders. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they created a ridge and looked down into a small, hidden valley. There, nestled among the pines, was the Apache camp, a collection of wickiups hastily constructed from branches and hides, with several small cook fires sending thin columns of smoke into the air. "We have arrived," Nakohe announced, relief evident in his voice despite his usual stoicism. They descended into the valley, and as they approached the camp, people emerged from the wickiups to watch their arrival. Elizabeth felt the weight of their stares, some curious, others openly hostile. She was, after all, a white woman, and whites had brought nothing but suffering to the Apache. An elderly man stepped forward as they reached the edge of the camp, his deeply lined face impassive as he addressed Nakohe in their language. The conversation was brief, ending with a nod from the old man toward Elizabeth. "This is Natan, a respected elder," Nakohe explained. "He says you may stay as his guest, under his protection. It is a great honor." "Please thank him for me," Elizabeth said, dismounting awkwardly. Her legs nearly buckled after so many hours in the saddle, but she forced herself to stand straight before the elder. "And tell him I'm deeply sorry for the loss of your people." Nakohe, translated, and the old man studied Elizabeth for a long moment before replying. He says grief is a burden all must carry in these times, Nakohe relayed. He wishes to hear why men hunt a white woman through Apache lands. Of course, Elizabeth. Agreed, I'll explain everything. They were led to Natan's wickiup, a structure slightly larger than the others. Inside, Elizabeth found it surprisingly comfortable. Pine boughs covered with hides created a soft floor, and a small fire in a central pit provided warmth without. Excessive smoke, most of which escaped through a vent in the roof. Several other elders joined them, along with a woman Nakohe introduced as Leah, his cousin and the daughter of his slain aunt. Her dark eyes held no welcome for Elizabeth, only a banked anger that was entirely understandable under the circumstances. With Nakohe translating, Elizabeth explained everything: the stagecoach robbery, her father's hidden documents, the conspiracy involving the railroad barons, and the raiders' relentless pursuit. She showed them the papers, though they meant little to people who couldn't read English. Still, they seemed to grasp the significance. When she finished, the elders conferred among themselves, while Nakohe occasionally added his own observations. Elizabeth sat quietly, trying to decipher the tone of the discussion, if not the words themselves. Leah remained silent throughout, her gaze never leaving Elizabeth's face. Finally, Natan spoke at length, his gnarled hands emphasizing certain points as he addressed the group. When he finished, Nakohe turned to Elizabeth. "The elders agree that you should remain here until we can determine a safe way to continue your journey," he explained. "The documents must reach their destination, not just for your father's justice, but because these railroad men have stolen Apache land as well." "Then our causes are aligned," Elizabeth observed. "Yes, but there is disagreement about how to proceed." Nakohe glanced at Leah, whose expression had hardened. "Some believe you should continue alone, that your presence endangers the whole band. Others think the documents should be taken by Apache riders to the nearest honest Indian agent, bypassing Fort Bowie altogether." "And what do you think?" Elizabeth asked, meeting his gaze directly. "I believe these men will not stop until they have the documents, and all who know of them are dead," Nakohe replied bluntly. "Whether you go alone or stay here, the danger remains. Better to face it together than divided." Natan spoke again, and this time it clearly marked the end of the council. The elders filed out of the wickiup, leaving only Nakohe, Leah, and Elizabeth with the old man. "You will stay with Leah," Nakohe translated the elders' words. "She has space in her dwelling. We will speak more tomorrow, after the mourning ceremony. For the fallen." Elizabeth looked toward Leah, trying to gauge her reaction to this arrangement. The Apache woman's face revealed nothing, but her stiff posture spoke volumes. She was not pleased with the assignment. "Please tell her I'm grateful for her hospitality," Elizabeth said carefully, "and that I understand her grief and anger. I would feel the same in her position." When Nakohe translated, something flickered in Leah's dark eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement of Elizabeth's empathy. She responded briefly in Apache. "She says you should come with her now," Nakohe relayed. "She will show you where to sleep and provide food." Elizabeth thanked Natan once more before following Leah from the wickiup. Outside, the camp was settling into evening routines. Women tending cooking fires, children being called in from play, men gathering to discuss the day's events or keep watch at the valley's perimeter. Many eyes followed Elizabeth as she walked beside Leah, but no one approached or spoke to them. She was tolerated, not welcomed, a distinction she understood perfectly. Leah's wickiup was smaller than Natan's, but similarly constructed. Inside, Elizabeth found a space had been cleared for her on one side, with a folded blanket providing minimal comfort. Leah gestured toward it without speaking, then busied herself with a small cooking pot suspended over an equally small fire. The aroma of the simple stew made Elizabeth's stomach growl audibly. They had eaten little during their flight through the mountains, and now her body demanded sustenance. Leah glanced at her, then silently ladled a portion of the stew into a wooden bowl and handed it to her. "Thank you," Elizabeth said, taking the bowl gratefully. She sat cross-legged by the fire and began to eat, trying not to appear too ravenous despite her hunger. After a few minutes of silence, Leah spoke, not in Apache, but in halting, accented English. "You bring death to us." Elizabeth paused, the spoon halfway to her mouth. "I never wanted that. I'm sorry about your mother." Leah's eyes flashed. "Sorry does not bring her back." "No," Elizabeth agreed softly. "It doesn't. Nothing can." "Why these papers so important? Worth dying for?" Elizabeth considered how to explain the significance to someone with no context for American business or politics. "The men who want these papers have stolen land from many people, including your people. They've lied, cheated, and paid bribes to government officials. With these documents, they could be punished, forced to give back what they've taken or pay for their crimes." "White man's justice," Leah said dismissively. "Never help Apache." "Perhaps not usually," Elizabeth acknowledged, "but this time it might. If these men are stopped, they can't take more land, can't force more people from their homes." Leah studied, her skepticism evident in her expression. "You believe this?" "I do," Elizabeth said firmly. "My father is a fair man. He sees injustice and tries to stop it, regardless of who suffers. That's why he sent these papers with me, to make sure they reached people who would use them properly." "Your father used you," Leah observed bluntly. "Put you in danger without telling me." The accusation stung, partly because Elizabeth had thought the same thing. "He was trying to protect me by not telling me. He thought I would be safer not knowing." "He was wrong," Leah said simply. "Yes," Elizabeth admitted after a moment. "He was wrong about that." Something in her honest acknowledgement seemed to satisfy Leah. The Apache woman nodded once, then returned to her own meal. They ate in silence after that, but it felt less hostile, more contemplative. As night fell completely, Elizabeth realized just how exhausted she was. 3 days of desperate flight, minimal rest, and constant anxiety had taken their toll. The simple act of finishing her meal required immense effort, her eyelids growing heavier by the second. Leah noticed her struggle and gestured toward the sleeping area she had prepared. "Sleep. Tomorrow is the ceremony for the dead. Then the council decides what to do with you." Elizabeth was too tired to be offended by the phrasing. She thanked Leah again, then crawled to the designated space and wrapped herself in the offered blanket. Despite the hard ground and strange surroundings, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke to the sounds of the camp stirring around her. For a moment, disoriented by deep sleep, she thought she was back in Boston, hearing the morning bustle of servants preparing the household for the day. Then memory flooded back. The stagecoach, the desert, Nakkohe, the raiders, the Apache camp. Elizabeth sat up, finding Leah already gone from the wickiup. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the structure, suggesting mid-morning. She had slept far longer than intended. She rose quickly, attempting to make herself presentable with the limited resources available. Her once fine traveling outfit was now a tattered, dirty assemblage, barely recognizable as proper clothing. Her hair, having long since lost its pins, hung in tangled waves down her back. She did what she could to smooth it with her fingers before, venturing outside. The camp was already engaged in preparations for the morning ceremony. In the center of the clearing, a large fire was being built. Nearby, 3 bodies, Leah's mother and the other victims of the raid, lay in state, wrapped in blankets and adorned with personal possessions. Elizabeth stood uncertainly at the entrance of Leah's wickiup, unsure of her place in these proceedings. As an outsider, worse, as the reason for the attack that had claimed these lives, she didn't know if her presence would be welcome or seen. As an intrusion, Nakoe appeared at her side, as if sensing her discomfort. "You should attend," he said quietly, "to show respect. Stand with me, follow what I do." "Are you sure?" Elizabeth asked. "I don't want to offend anyone." "Some will be offended no matter what you do," Nakohe replied pragmatically. "But Natan has given permission, and he is respected. It will be better if you participate than if you hide." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for his guidance. As they walked toward the gathering crowd, she noticed several warriors positioned around the perimeter of the camp, rifles at the ready. "Are we in danger here?" she asked softly. "The raiders would not attack an entire camp directly," Nakohe assured her. "But we remain vigilant. They may try to spy on us, to learn our plans." The ceremony began as the entire band gathered around the funeral pyre. Elizabeth stood slightly behind Nakohe, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible while showing proper respect. The rituals were unfamiliar to her. Chanting, the burning of sacred herbs, testimonials spoken in Apache, but their emotional power transcended language. Leah stood near her mother's body, her face a mask of contained grief. When it came time for family members to speak, she stepped forward and delivered what seemed to be a passionate tribute, her voice occasionally breaking with emotion. Though Elizabeth couldn't understand the words, the daughter's love and loss needed no translation. As the bodies were placed on the pyre and the flames ignited, Elizabeth felt tears tracking down her own cheeks. Death had been her constant companion. These past days, from the slaughter of her fellow passengers to these innocent Apache victims, so much loss, and for what? Greed, power. The endless hunger of men who already had more than they could use in 10 lifetimes. The ceremony continued through the morning and into early afternoon. As the fires burned down to embers, the mood in the camp gradually shifted. From mourning to resolve, Elizabeth noticed the elders gathering once again at Natan's wake, with Nakohe summoned to join them. She remained with the main group, feeling increasingly conspicuous as the only white person present. Children stared openly at her. Adults were more subtle in their scrutiny, but no less aware of her presence. She tried to project calm dignity despite her bedraggled appearance and inner anxiety. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Nakohe emerged from the council and approached her. His expression gave nothing away. "The elders have reached a decision," he said, gesturing for her to follow him to a more private spot at the edge of the camp. "You will continue to San Francisco with the documents, as your father intended." Elizabeth felt a surge of relief. "Thank you. I know this couldn't have been an easy choice for them." "It was not," Nakohe confirmed, "but they see the wisdom in using the white man's own laws against him in this case." "Will I go alone?" she asked, already dreading the prospect of navigating the dangerous journey without his guidance. "No, I will accompany you." Nakohe's tone made it clear this was not open for debate. "And 2 others, Talaka, whom you met, and Kime, another scout who has traveled in white settlements before." Elizabeth was surprised but grateful. "That's more help than I expected. But won't that leave your people short of defenders if the raiders return?" "The band will move deeper into the mountains after we depart," Nakohe explained, "to places even the army has never found. They will be safer there than here." "When do we leave?" "At first light tomorrow." Nakohe glanced toward the western horizon. "There is a settlement 3 days' ride from here, Silver Springs, small, but it has a telegraph office. From there, we can alert the authorities in San Francisco to expect us and perhaps arrange military escort for the final stages of the journey." The plan sounded sensible, though Elizabeth had her doubts about how effective any alert might be. if the conspiracy reached into government circles, as her father had suggested. Still, it was better than simply trying to outrun the raiders all the way to California. "What about Fort Bowie?" she asked. "Couldn't we still seek help there?" Nakohe shook his head. "The elders believe it is too risky. We don't know which soldiers. Might be paid by the railroad men. Silver Springs is better, small enough to see strangers easily, large enough to have the telegraph." Elizabeth nodded, accepting his reasoning. "Then we should prepare. I'll need—" A commotion at the edge of camp interrupted her. Warriors were converging on a returning sentry who gestured urgently toward the valley entrance. Nakohe immediately moved to join them, with Elizabeth following close behind. The sentry spoke rapidly in Apache, pointing repeatedly down the valley. The warriors' expressions darkened, hands moving to weapons. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked Nakohe when there was a pause in the exchange. "Riders approaching," he replied grimly. "Many riders, not Apache." "The raiders?" she asked, fear constricting her throat. "Perhaps, or—" Nakohe narrowed his eyes, focusing on the distant figures now visible at the valley entrance. "Soldiers." Elizabeth followed his gaze, detecting the distinctive blue uniforms even at this distance. "The army? But how did they find us?" "That," Nakohe said, his voice hardening, "is what we must discover. Quickly!" The Apache camp erupted into controlled chaos. Women hurried children into hiding places in the surrounding forest. Warriors took defensive positions, though they held their fire as the column of soldiers continued their steady approach up the valley. "This makes no sense," Elizabeth said, watching the disciplined advance. "How did they find this place? And why come in force?" Nakohe's expression was grim. Someone told them where to look. His eyes scanned the gathered Apache, then returned to the soldiers. "We must speak to their leader before blood is shed." Elizabeth nodded. "I'll go with you. They won't shoot a white woman." For once, her privileged background might serve a practical purpose. The soldiers would hesitate to fire on a judge's daughter from Boston, giving them precious moments to establish communication. Natan approached, speaking urgently to Nakohe. Whatever he said caused Nakohe's jaw to tighten. "The elder says you should hide the documents," Nakohe translated. "Not all soldiers serve honor." Elizabeth retrieved her reticule from Leah's wiki-up and removed the envelope containing her father's evidence. Where to conceal it? The soldiers would surely search everything if they suspected its existence. Leah appeared at her side, silently holding out a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "Medicine bag," she explained in her limited English. "They do not touch. Bad luck." Understanding dawned on Elizabeth. Even prejudiced soldiers might hesitate to disturb items of spiritual significance. She gratefully transferred the documents to the pouch, which Leah then hung around her neck, tucking it beneath her deerskin dress. "Thank you," Elizabeth said, touched by the woman's unexpected help. Leah's expression remained stoic. "Not for you. For justice. For my mother." The soldiers had reached the halfway point of the valley. Elizabeth could now make out individual figures, perhaps 20 men in total, led by an officer on horseback. No artillery, which was one small mercy. They weren't expecting a battle then, just a show of force. Nakohe and Natan conferred briefly with other warriors, then turned to Elizabeth. "We will go to meet them," Nakohe said. "You, me, and the elder. Show empty hands. Speak clearly." Elizabeth nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The three of them walked forward, deliberately placing themselves between the advancing soldiers and the camp. Nakohe and Natan carried no visible weapons, though Elizabeth suspected they weren't entirely defenseless. The officer raised his hand, and the column halted about 50 yards away. After a moment's consideration, he rode forward alone, stopping, his horse at a conversational distance. He was younger than Elizabeth had expected, perhaps 30, with a neat mustache and intelligent eyes that assessed them carefully. "I am Lieutenant James Morrison, Fort Bowie," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "I'm looking for Miss Elizabeth Thornton of Boston." Elizabeth stepped forward slightly. "I am Elizabeth Thornton." The lieutenant's eyebrows rose in evident surprise. Whatever he'd expected to find, it wasn't a bedraggled society woman in the company of Apache elders. "Miss Thornton, are you being held against your will?" he asked, hand drifting toward his sidearm. "Not at all," she replied firmly. "These people saved my life after the Stagecoach robbery. They've offered me protection and hospitality." Morrison's expression registered skepticism. "We received intelligence that you survived the attack and were traveling with an Apache scout." His gaze shifted to Nakohe. "I presume that's you." "I am Nakohe, scout for Army at Fort Bowie," Nakohe confirmed, his English clear and deliberate. "I found Miss Thornton in the desert, helped her." "Then why didn't you bring her to the fort?" Morrison challenged. "We tried," Elizabeth interjected, "but we were pursued by the men who attacked the stagecoach. We had reason to believe the route to Fort Bowie was being watched." Morrison frowned. "Pursued? By whom?" "At least 15 men," Nakohe said. "They attacked Apache camp last night, killed 3. The lieutenant's frown deepened. "I've received no reports of any such attack." "Of course not," Elizabeth said. "These men aren't advertising their murders. Lieutenant, how did you find us? Who told you I was here?" Morrison hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "We received a telegraph from Judge William Thornton in Boston, inquiring urgently about his daughter's whereabouts after the stagecoach failed to reach Tucson. While investigating, one of our scouts reported rumors of a white woman traveling with Apache in these mountains." Elizabeth's mind raced. Her father was looking for her. That made sense. But which scout had reported her presence, and to whom had they reported first? "Lieutenant," she said carefully, "I need to speak with you privately. There's more to this situation than you know." Morrison considered her request, then nodded. "Very well, you may approach, Miss Thornton." He glanced at Nakohe and Natan. "Alone?" Nakohe tensed visibly. "Not safe. I'll be fine," Elizabeth assured him. "The lieutenant is an officer and a gentleman." She fixed Morrison with a pointed look. "Isn't that correct, sir?" "You have my word, Miss Thornton." Morrison dismounted, handing his reins to a sergeant who had ridden forward at his signal. "We'll speak just over there, in full view, but out of earshot." Elizabeth followed him to a spot perhaps 20 yards away, still visible to both soldiers and Apache, but sufficiently removed for private conversation. "Now, Miss Thornton," Morrison began once they were alone, "what is this all about? Judge Thornton's telegram suggested you might be carrying sensitive documents." Elizabeth studied the lieutenant carefully. Young, ambitious, and, by all appearances, honest. But could she trust him with the full truth? "Lieutenant, the stagecoach robbery was no ordinary crime," she began. "The men responsible targeted it specifically because I was aboard. They're working for powerful interests who will stop at nothing to retrieve certain evidence my father entrusted to me." Morrison's expression grew more serious. "What kind of evidence?" "Documentation of fraud and corruption involving the Western Pacific Railroad Corporation. Enough to send several prominent men to prison and overturn land grants throughout the territory." Elizabeth watched his reaction closely. "My father intended these papers to reach the federal prosecutor in San Francisco." "I see." Morrison rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "And you believe these men, these agents of the railroad, are still pursuing you?" "I know they are. They've already killed everyone aboard the stagecoach, 3 innocent Apache and likely others." "Who got in their way?" Elizabeth's voice hardened. "They attacked a peaceful camp last night, Lieutenant. Women and children fled for their lives. Morrison's jaw tightened. If what you're saying is true, this is a matter for the army to handle. You should return with us to Fort Bowie, where we can protect you properly. How can I be sure the fort is safe? Elizabeth challenged. These conspirators have demonstrated considerable influence. They knew exactly where to find us in these mountains. Someone is feeding them information. The lieutenant frowned. Are you suggesting there's a traitor at Fort Bowie? I'm suggesting caution, Elizabeth replied. I don't know whom to trust, Lieutenant. My father's letter warned that the conspiracy reaches into government circles. Morrison was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Where are these documents now? Elizabeth hesitated. In a safe place, with your Apache friends. Morrison's tone held no judgment, merely curiosity. Would that surprise you, Lieutenant? Perhaps not. A faint smile touched his lips. Nakohe has a reputation for integrity, even among officers who share little love for the Apache. This unexpected endorsement eased some of Elizabeth's concerns, but not all. What do you propose we do? I suggest a compromise, Morrison said. I'll leave most of my men here to protect the Apache camp against further reprisals. Meanwhile, you, Nakohe, and perhaps one or two others will accompany me back to Fort Bowie. From there, we can arrange secure transport to San Francisco. And the documents? Keep them where they are for now, Morrison advised. If there is a spy at the fort, better they don't know exactly where to look. Elizabeth considered the proposal. It seemed reasonable, and Morrison's willingness to divide his force to protect the camp spoke to his sincerity. Still, doubt lingered. I need to consult with Nakohe and the elders, she said finally. Of course, Morrison nodded. Take whatever time you need. My men will maintain their position here, with no hostile action unless provoked. They returned to where Nakohe and Natan waited. Elizabeth explained the lieutenant's proposal in detail, while Nakohe translated for the elders' benefit. Both men listened intently, their expressions revealing little. When she finished, Natan spoke at length in Apache, his weathered hands emphasizing key points. Nakohe nodded occasionally, then turned to Elizabeth. The elder believes Lieutenant Morrison speaks with straight tongue, he translated, but he says we should still be cautious. The elder suggests you, me, Tlaka, and Leah should go to the fort. Leah will keep documents safe. Elizabeth blinked in surprise. Leah, but she barely speaks English, and she's a woman, Nakohe finished for her. Yes, who would suspect? And she has the strongest reason to see justice done. Her mother's blood calls for it. The logic was sound, though unexpected. Elizabeth looked toward Leah, who stood at the edge of the gathering, her dark eyes watchful. Would she agree to such a dangerous mission? As if reading her thoughts, Nakohe added, Leah has already agreed. For her mother. For her people. Elizabeth squared her shoulders. Then I accept Lieutenant Morrison's proposal with these conditions. When they explained the arrangement to Morrison, he hesitated only briefly before agreeing. 4 of you, then. We'll depart in 1 hour. That should give us enough daylight to reach more favorable terrain before making camp. As Morrison returned to his men to issue orders, Elizabeth approached Leah. The Apache woman's face remained impassive, but something like resolve burned in her eyes. Thank you, Elizabeth said simply, for risking yourself this way. Leah touched the medicine pouch hanging beneath her dress. These papers, they bring justice. They will, Elizabeth promised. If we succeed, then we succeed. Leah's tone allowed no possibility of failure. Or die trying. With those ominous words hanging between them, they turned to prepare for the journey ahead, a journey that would take them into the very heart of danger. The small party departed the Apache camp as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. Lieutenant Morrison led the way, followed by Elizabeth and her 3 Apache companions. 10 soldiers had remained behind to protect the camp, while 9 accompanied their lieutenant on the return journey to Fort Bowie. Elizabeth rode a cavalry horse provided by Morrison, a sturdy gelding with a military saddle that, while not designed for a woman, proved far more comfortable than her previous mounts. Nakohe, Tlaka, and Leah rode their own horses, keeping close together and slightly apart from the soldiers. Morrison had been true to his word thus far, treating the Apache with professional courtesy, if not warmth. Still, Elizabeth noted the wariness with which his men regarded her indigenous companions, a mixture of respect, suspicion, and in some cases poorly disguised contempt. "How long until Fort Bowie, Lieutenant?" she asked as they navigated a narrow mountain trail. 2 days, if the weather holds," Morrison replied. "We'll take a more direct route than you came. There's a cavalry outpost where we can rest tomorrow." "Night," Elizabeth nodded, glancing back at Leah. The Apache woman rode with surprising grace for someone rarely on horseback, her face a study in stoic endurance. The precious documents remained hidden in the medicine pouch around her neck, the safest hiding place they could devise. Who would suspect an Apache woman of carrying legal papers that could topple a financial empire? They traveled until dusk, making good progress down from the higher elevations. When Morrison called a halt for the night, they had reached a small plateau with a clear spring, an ideal campsite with good visibility in all directions. "Post double sentries tonight," Morrison instructed his sergeant. 2-hour rotations. The soldiers efficiently established camp, erecting a small tent for Elizabeth's privacy. She was touched by the gesture, though it struck her as oddly formal. Given all she'd endured in recent days, an attempt to restore some civilization to your journey, Miss Thornton, Morrison explained when he noticed her bemusement. "I imagine proper accommodations have been scarce." "Proper accommodations seem rather trivial when one is fighting for survival, Lieutenant," Elizabeth replied with a small smile. "But I appreciate the thought." As the soldiers prepared an evening meal, Nakohe approached Elizabeth where she sat. "Near the central fire. We are watched," he said quietly in Apache, having taught her a few basic phrases during their time together. Elizabeth maintained her relaxed posture, betraying no reaction. "Soldiers?" she asked in English. Nakohe gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Not soldiers. Others, in the rocks to the east." Elizabeth's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Does Morrison know?" "I will tell him, but—" "Carefully." Nakohe's eyes scanned the camp. "Some here may have loose tongues." He moved away casually, eventually finding his way to where Morrison was reviewing maps by lantern light. Elizabeth couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw the lieutenant's posture change, spine stiffening, hand unconsciously moving closer to his sidearm. After a brief exchange, Morrison folded his maps and began circulating among his men, speaking quietly to each. Elizabeth recognized the technique, passing orders individually to avoid announcing them to potential eavesdroppers. Tlaka materialized beside her, offering a plate of the soldiers' beans and hardtack. "Eat," he said simply. "May need strength." Later, Elizabeth accepted the food gratefully. Tlaka's English was more limited than Nakohe, but his meaning was clear enough. Whatever watched them from the darkness might not wait until morning to make its presence known. Leah joined them, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, a surprising gesture from the woman who had initially regarded Elizabeth with open hostility. Perhaps shared danger was building bridges where words could not. As the camp settled for the night, Morrison approached their small group. "Nakohe has informed me of our company," he said quietly. "I've adjusted the sentries accordingly, but I suggest all of you remain alert. Miss Thornton, please keep to your tent and stay low. If trouble comes, we'll handle it." Elizabeth shook her head. "With respect, Lieutenant, I won't cower in a tent while others risk their lives on my behalf. I can handle a firearm if necessary." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't argue. "Very well. Stay close to Nakohe then. He knows what to do if—" He left the sentence unfinished. Night descended fully upon the camp. Most of the soldiers retired to their bedrolls, while the designated sentries took up positions at the perimeter. Elizabeth remained by the fire with her Apache. Companions, too tense to sleep despite her fatigue. Hours passed in taut silence. Then, just past midnight, a single shot cracked through the darkness. "Ambush!" a sentry shouted, followed by a strangled cry that ended abruptly. The camp erupted into action. Soldiers rolled from their blankets, weapons at the ready. Morrison barked orders, directing men to defensive positions. "Get down!" Nakohe pulled Elizabeth behind a large rock as bullets whizzed through the camp. Leah and Tlaka pressed in beside them, forming a protective huddle. The attackers fired from multiple positions. The rocks Nakohe had noted earlier, plus new locations to the north and west. They had surrounded the camp while the occupants slept. "How many?" Elizabeth whispered. "Too many," Nakohe replied grimly. 10, maybe 15. Morrison's men returned fire, but they were shooting at shadows and muzzle flashes, with little chance of hitting their targets. The lieutenant himself moved from position to position, steadying his men and coordinating their defense. "We're pinned down," he reported when he reached their location. "They've got the high ground on 3 sides. Is the east slope still clear?" Nakohe asked. Morrison nodded. "For now." "Then some must go that way," Nakohe stated firmly. "Not all can escape, but some." The meaning was clear. A sacrifice by some to ensure others got through. Elizabeth's chest tightened at the thought. "Who goes and who stays?" she asked. Morrison made the decision without hesitation. "You, Nakohe, and the documents are what matter. The rest of us will create a diversion." "No," Elizabeth protested. "I won't have more deaths on my conscience." "This isn't about your conscience." "Miss Thornton," Morrison replied sharply, "it's about completing your mission. Those papers must reach San Francisco." A bullet splintered the rock inches from Elizabeth's head, emphasizing his point. She flinched, but held her ground. "Leah carries papers," Nakohe reminded them. "She should go." "Then all 4 of you go," Morrison decided. "My men and I will draw their fire to the west. When you hear us charge, run for the eastern slope. Don't stop until you're well clear." Elizabeth stared at him, recognizing the selflessness of his offer. "Lieutenant, why are you doing this? You barely know me or my cause." Morrison's expression was resolute in the dim firelight. "I swore an oath to uphold the law, Miss Thornton. If what you've told me is true, these attackers represent corruption that threatens everything I stand for. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "I'm not planning to die tonight, just giving you a head start." There was no time for further debate. Morrison returned to his men, issuing hushed orders. Moments later, a coordinated volley erupted from the soldiers' positions, directed toward the western attackers. "Ready," Nakohe whispered, gripping Elizabeth's arm. Another volley, followed by Morrison's commanding shout, "Charge!" The soldiers rushed the western position, firing and yelling as they advanced. The attackers, momentarily surprised by the aggressive tactic, redirected their fire. "Now!" Nakohe pulled Elizabeth to her feet. Together with Leah and Tlaka, they sprinted toward the eastern slope, staying low and using scattered boulders for cover. Gunfire and shouts receded behind them as they climbed, slipping on loose stones in their haste. Elizabeth's lungs burned, her legs protesting the steep ascent, but fear drove her onward. They reached the ridgeline without being spotted and paused briefly to catch their breath. Below, the battle continued, muzzle flashes illuminating the night like deadly fireflies. "Lieutenant Morrison," Elizabeth began, staring back at the chaos, "is buying our lives with his courage," Nakohe finished. "We must make it worth the price." With one last glance at the embattled camp, Elizabeth turned and followed her companions into the darkness, the weight of Morrison's sacrifice heavy on her heart. The night swallowed them as they descended the eastern slope, the sounds of battle gradually fading behind them. They had escaped the trap, but Fort Bowie now lay out of reach. Once again they were fugitives in a hostile wilderness, hunted by determined enemies, and this time they were entirely on their own. For 3 days they traveled without respite, taking paths known only to the Apache. They avoided settlements and military outposts, trusting no one. Elizabeth's body, already pushed to its limits, protested every mile, but determination drove her forward. The documents Leah carried represented more than just her father's case. They had become a sacred trust, purchased with the blood of innocents. "We must reach Silver Springs," Nakohe announced as they made camp on the 3rd night. "It is our only chance now." "Is it still 3 days away?" Elizabeth asked, massaging her aching legs. "2, if we push hard." Nakohe studied their meager supplies. "But we need food and water before then." Tlaka volunteered to hunt at dawn, vanishing into the wilderness before first light. He returned hours later with 2 rabbits and a small deer, displaying hunting skills that left Elizabeth in awe. As they prepared the meat, Leah approached Elizabeth, the medicine pouch still secure around her neck. "Your father," she said in her halting English. "He's a good man, fair to all people?" The question surprised Elizabeth. "He believes in the law," she answered carefully, "in justice for everyone, regardless of their station." "Apache too," Leah pressed. Elizabeth hesitated. Her father had never expressed specific views on indigenous rights, but she knew his fundamental commitment to fairness. "I believe he would want justice for your people too. These railroad men have stolen from everyone. White settlers, Apache, other tribes." Leah nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Then we finish this, for all people." This simple statement of solidarity touched Elizabeth deeply. Despite everything, despite the gulf of culture and experience between them, they had found common cause in the pursuit of justice. Their journey resumed at midday, following game trails through increasingly arid terrain as they descended from the mountains. Water became scarce, forcing them to ration their supplies carefully. By nightfall, they had covered an impressive distance, but exhaustion claimed them all. "One more day," Nakohe encouraged as they settled around a small fire. "We will reach Silver Springs tomorrow." Elizabeth nodded wearily. "And then?" "Telegraph to San Francisco," he replied. "Message to federal prosecutor, then train if possible." It seemed so simple when stated plainly, yet Elizabeth knew countless dangers still lay between them and success. The conspirators had resources, influence, and a clear willingness to kill. 4 fugitives, 1 white woman, and 3 Apache, stood. "Little chance if confronted directly. We need a strategy," she said. "Something unexpected." They discussed options late into the night, formulating a plan that relied on misdirection and timing. It wasn't perfect, but it offered their best hope of success. Dawn broke clear and hot as they began their final push toward Silver Springs. The landscape changed gradually, sagebrush giving way to scattered buildings on the horizon by late afternoon. They paused on a ridge overlooking the settlement, a dusty collection of wooden structures surrounding a main street with a railroad, a depot at its western edge. There, Nakohe pointed to a building with a telegraph wire running to it. "Post office has a telegraph." "And there," Tlaka added, indicating the depot, "train comes tomorrow morning. I heard a whistle yesterday." "Perfect timing," Elizabeth remarked, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "If our plan works." They waited until dusk before making their approach. According to their strategy, Elizabeth would enter town alone. A battered but recognizable white woman would attract less immediate suspicion than Apache companions. Nakohe, Tlaka, and Leah would circle to the depot, ready to board the train when it arrived. Before separating, Leah transferred the medicine pouch to Elizabeth. "Now you carry," she insisted. "Safer with you in town." Elizabeth accepted the responsibility, solemnly. "I'll see you at the depot at dawn. With a final nod to her companions, she began the walk into Silver Springs. Her appearance, dirty, tattered clothing, sunburned face, drew immediate attention from the few townspeople still on the Yeo Street. Whispers followed her as she made her way to the general store, still open despite the late hour. The shopkeeper, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, stared openly as she entered. "Heavens, ma'am, are you all right? I need to send a telegram." Elizabeth replied, ignoring his question. "It's urgent. Post office is closed till morning," he informed her. "But wait, aren't you?" His eyes widened in recognition. "You're the Thornton woman from the Stagecoach Robbery." News travelled fast in the territories. Elizabeth seized the opportunity. "Yes, I survived, and I must send a telegram immediately." The shopkeeper rushed to assist, escorting her to the postmaster's home adjacent to the post office. The postmaster, roused from his evening meal, was equally astonished by her appearance, but quickly agreed to open his office. "Who are you sending?" "To, miss," he asked as he prepared the telegraph. "The federal prosecutor in San Francisco," Elizabeth replied, "and my father, Judge William Thornton, in Boston." She composed 2 brief messages, one formally requesting protection for her arrival in San Francisco with evidence of criminal conspiracy, the other informing her father she was alive and proceeding with his case as intended. Both were signed, with a family code phrase that would confirm their authenticity. As the telegraph key clacked her messages across the wires, Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Even if she failed to reach San Francisco, the authorities now knew the evidence existed. The conspiracy was exposed. "There's a hotel down the street," the postmaster offered when he finished. "Nothing fancy, but clean beds." Elizabeth thanked him but declined. "Is there somewhere more private? I have reason to believe I'm still in danger." The postmaster exchanged glances with the shopkeeper. "There's been strangers in town past couple days," the shopkeeper confirmed, "asking questions about travelers, mean-looking sorts." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "The raiders." "You can stay at my sister's boarding house," the postmaster decided. "Back entrance, private room. I'll take you, and there myself." The modest room provided blessed privacy. Elizabeth bathed for the first time in days, washing away layers of desert dust. Though her clothing remained tattered, she felt renewed, ready for the final stage of their journey. She slept fitfully, waking before dawn. The medicine pouch with its precious contents remained secure around her neck as she slipped out the boarding house's back door. The streets were empty as she made her way toward the depot. No sign of the raiders, though. Every shadow seemed to harbor potential threats. The train sat on the tracks, building steam for its imminent departure. Elizabeth scanned the area for her companions, tension mounting when she didn't immediately spot them. Has something gone wrong? Then she saw Leah, dressed in a calico dress and bonnet that rendered her nearly unrecognizable as Apache. She stood near the passenger car, eyes alertly scanning the platform. Their gazes met, and Leah gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the cargo area. Elizabeth understood. Nakohe and Tlaka were already hidden aboard. As Elizabeth approached the ticket counter, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. Shouts, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The raiders had found them. Last. "Call for boarding," the conductor announced, oblivious to the approaching danger. Elizabeth purchased her ticket with shaking hands and rushed toward the passenger car where Leah waited. Behind them, horsemen appeared at the end of the street, riding hard toward the depot. "Go!" Elizabeth urged Leah up the steps. The conductor, now aware of the approaching riders, hastily signaled the engineer. The train lurched forward as Elizabeth climbed aboard, bullets splintering wood around her. She felt a sharp sting across her arm, but ignored it, tumbling inside. As the train gathered speed, through the window, she watched the raiders reach the platform, firing futilely at the departing train. Their faces, contorted with rage, grew smaller as distance separated pursuer from prey. They had failed. In the relative safety of the moving train, Elizabeth found Nakohe and Tlaka hidden in a baggage compartment. Together, the four fugitives finally allowed themselves to breathe, to acknowledge their narrow escape. "It's not over," Elizabeth cautioned. "They may telegraph ahead, try to intercept us." "We switched trains at Junction City," Nakohe replied. "Different route than expected." Elizabeth nodded, impressed by his foresight. Always one step ahead, this Apache scout who had saved her life so many times. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth Thornton stood in a San Francisco courtroom, watching as the federal prosecutor presented her father's evidence to a special grand jury. The documents had proven even more damning than anticipated, revealing a conspiracy that reached into the Senate and the territorial governor's offices. Indictments were issued for 12 men, including 3 railroad executives and 2 senators. Newspapers from coast to coast carried the story of the stagecoach survivor who had braved the desert and outmaneuvered assassins to deliver justice. Lieutenant Morrison had survived the ambush, though 3 of his men had not. His testimony corroborated Elizabeth's account and brought additional charges against the conspirators for the murder of federal troops. As for Nakohe, Tlaka, and Leah, they had refused public recognition, knowing the danger it might bring to their people. But Elizabeth had ensured their role was acknowledged where it mattered. Her father, using his considerable influence, secured a federal land grant, protecting a significant portion of Apache territory from future railroad development. On her final evening in San Francisco, before returning east, Elizabeth met Nakohe. "One last time on a quiet bluff overlooking the Pacific. Your people's land is secure," she told him, handing over the official documents. "It's not everything that was taken, but it's a start." Nakohe accepted the papers with dignity. "You kept your word, brought justice." "We brought justice," Elizabeth corrected. "I would have died in that desert without you." The setting sun cast long shadows as they stood in companionable silence, 2 people from vastly different worlds, bound by an extraordinary journey. "What will you do now?" Nakohe finally asked. Elizabeth smiled softly. "Return to Boston, face my father. After that," she shrugged, "the world seems larger now, full of possibilities I never considered before." "And your fiancé?" she twisted. The engagement ring on her finger, a ring she had somehow managed to keep through all their trials. "Robert is a good man, but he never knew the woman I've become." She met Nakohe's gaze directly. "I'm not sure anyone in Boston will." Nakohe nodded, understanding what she left unspoken. "Some journeys change you forever." As the sun disappeared below the horizon, they said their goodbyes, not with embraces or flowery words, but with the simple respect of survivors who had seen both the worst and best in each other. Elizabeth Thornton, sole survivor of the Stagecoach Robbery, walked back toward the lights of San Francisco. Behind her, Nakohe melted into the gathering, darkness returning to the wilderness that had forged their unlikely bond. Their paths would likely never cross again. But in the vast, unforgiving territory between civilization and wilderness, their story had left an indelible mark, a testament to courage, honor, and justice that transcended the boundaries of culture and prejudice. Some said Elizabeth never did return to Boston. That instead, she found her way back to the territories, using her inheritance to establish schools for Apache children, advocating for indigenous rights in territorial courts. Others claimed Nakohe eventually became one of the most respected liaisons between the army and the Apache nations, preventing bloodshed through his wisdom and diplomacy. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between, in the silent understanding between 2 souls forever changed by a journey through the desert, and the justice they delivered together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.